Okay, so have you ever been waiting for a parking spot and the person just suddenly seems to take ages to leave?
Oh, yeah, that feeling.
Or like, how come so many professional athletes seem to have birthdays early in the year? It's a weird pattern, right?
It is. Or even thinking like deeper. Why do some people hoard huge amounts of money they'll just never spend?
Exactly. Those little questions, they're not just random quirks.
No, they're really windows into what social psychology is all about.
Right. And that's what we're doing in this deep dive using the sources you sent over.
Mm-hmm.
We're getting into the fundamentals, basically, the science of why people do what they do,
Mm-hmm.
especially when other people are involved.
Think of it as a quick way to get the core concepts down. The early big ideas, how researchers actually study this stuff,
Mhm.
the building blocks, really.
Okay, let's get into it. Maybe starting way back,
Yeah.
late 1800s.
Good place to start because, interestingly, the very first experiments we know about, well, they seem to point in completely different directions.
Yeah, that's fascinating. You had Norman Triplett, 1897.
That's the one. He was looking at cyclists, I think.
Yeah, and he noticed they seemed faster when racing directly against someone else, not just against the clock.
Right. So he did that experiment, the competition machine.
Yes, with the kids winding fishing reels. When they did it next to each other, they wound faster than alone.
So his takeaway was basically having someone else there, it sort of boosts your energy or makes you more competitive.
Something like that.
Yeah.
But then, almost at the same time,
Max Ringelmann in France, right. He was doing experiments with men pulling ropes.
the rope pulling, and he found the exact opposite thing happened.
Pretty much, as he added more people to the group pulling the rope, the total force wasn't just the sum of individuals. Each person actually pulled less hard.
Wow. So, okay, one says people try harder around others, the other says they slack off.
Exactly. So right from the beginning, it hinted that just being around others wasn't a simple thing. It must depend on, the task, the context, other factors.
So, yeah, complex from day one. And the field started getting more formal around then. Textbooks in 1908.
Right. And then the big events of the 20th century, the wars, economic shifts, they really pushed psychologists to understand these big social forces.
You had thinkers like Gordon Allport. He really focused on attitudes, didn't he?
Called them the most indispensable concept, yeah. Key to understanding people in groups.
And Kurt Lewin, his idea feels so fundamental now that behavior it's not just the person, not just the situation.
It's the interaction. Behavior is a function of the person and the situation. Huge idea.
You can really see how urgent this research felt with people like Stanley Milgram, right? His obedience studies.
Directly driven by trying to understand things like what happened in World War II, how ordinary people could do terrible things.
So social psychology kind of grew up trying to take the scientific methods from behaviorism, experiments, observable stuff, and apply them to those inner things like thoughts and feelings, which psychoanalysis talked about but didn't really measure scientifically.
Exactly. It carved out its own path, finding ways to scientifically measure thoughts, feelings, and behavior. And it kept evolving.
Later on, you got big areas like social cognition, how we think about other people and ourselves.
Yeah, that really took off from the 70s. And studying the self, too.
Yeah.
Self-esteem, self-control, all that.
And the sources mentioned a shift after 1989, maybe focusing more on racial and ethnic conflict.
Definitely saw more research in that area. So looking back at this history, why does it matter for us now?
Well, it shows the field didn't just pop up, right? It grew out of trying to answer real difficult questions about why we act the way we do, especially together. It gives context.
Exactly. Context for the big questions we still grapple with.
And speaking of big questions, maybe the biggest is that nature versus culture thing.
Yes. The classic debate. Are we the way we are because of our biology, our nature, or is it mostly our upbringing, society, culture?
The sources define psyche pretty broadly. Mind, emotions, desires, how we see things.
Right. And nature is the physical world, laws of physics, biology, birth, death, genetics.
And culture is described as this information system. Shared ideas, common ways of doing things. It's what lets groups live together, helps us get what we need.
Often by working together or relying on others.
The sources use a really striking case study here, the Brenda case.
Yes, the boy raised as a girl after a circumcision accident went wrong. It's a powerful example because at the time, the prevailing view among many experts was that gender identity was almost entirely learned, entirely cultural.
Socialization was key, they thought.
But Brenda's story, Well, it really challenged that. Despite being raised female, Brenda never really felt female and eventually transitioned back to male later in life.
And there were other similar cases mentioned, too.
Yeah. It strongly suggested that culture can't just mold everything. Some aspects of who we are, maybe like core gender identity, seem to have significant biological underpinnings that socialization can't just overwrite.
The Castor Semenya case is another example mentioned, showing how society still struggles with this intersection of biology, cultural norms, and gender stereotypes.
But the really key insight isn't just nature or culture. It's how they constantly interact. They shape each other.
How does that work? Give me an example.
Okay, think about the relative age effect. We mention it with athletes, but it happens in school, too.
Right, the kid's born early in the selection year.
Exactly. Nature gives you your birth date, which relates to your physical maturity at a certain point in time. Culture then imposes an arbitrary cutoff date, say January 1st for a sports league, or September 1st for starting school.
So a kid born right after the cutoff might be almost a year older, bigger, maybe more coordinated than a kid born just before it, but they're in the same group.
Precisely. And that initial, maybe small natural difference gets amplified by the cultural system. The older kids are seen as more talented, get better coaching, more encouragement, more opportunities.
And the younger ones might get discouraged and drop out.
Yeah. So the cultural rule interacts with the natural variation and creates this huge advantage or disadvantage that shapes who succeeds long term. It's nature and culture working together.
Wow, that really shows how a seemingly neutral rule can have big effects.
Another example from the sources, precarious manhood.
What's that?
The idea is that, culturally speaking, womanhood is often seen as something relatively natural, a biological progression. You mature, you become a woman.
Okay.
But manhood, in many cultures, is viewed as something precarious, something you have to achieve, something you have to prove, maybe through rituals or providing or showing toughness. It's not just assumed, it can be lost.
So it's more of a cultural status you have to earn and defend.
Kind of. And research shows this cultural belief has real psychological effects. Studies find that when men's masculinity is threatened in experiments, they often react with more stress or aggression compared to women whose femininity is threatened. Culture is shaping the psychological experience here.
That's really interesting. Culture affecting how we even react to threats to our identity.
And one more deep interaction. Pathogens and culture.
Disease risk shaping culture.
Well, the research suggests that in regions historically high in pathogens, you tend to see cultures develop that place a higher value on conformity and collectivism.
Why would that be?
The thinking is, if there's a high risk of disease, sticking to traditional ways, obeying authority, and being wary of outsiders might actually be adaptive strategies to limit exposure to new pathogens. So nature, the disease environment, might actually push culture in a certain direction, towards more caution, more in-group focus.
So nature isn't just the background, it can actively shape cultural values like conformity or prejudice.
That's the idea. It really underlines how humans aren't just social animals like ants or bees. We are distinctively cultural. We build these complex information systems, we have division of labor, shared knowledge, ways to resolve conflict beyond just fighting.
It makes you think, doesn't it? How much are my own preferences, my reactions, even my assumptions about gender shaped by this constant dance between my biology and the cultural soup I swim in?
Absolutely. And navigating this complexity, living in these cultural systems, requires some special features of the human mind.
Like the Dutux mind concept. That sounds intriguing.
It's the idea that we basically have two processing systems operating.
Okay.
There's the automatic system. Fast, effortless, happens outside of awareness. It handles all the routine stuff, reads situations quickly, gives you gut feelings, jumps to conclusions. It's like your mental autopilot, always on.
Like recognizing faces instantly or driving a familiar route without really thinking about every turn?
Exactly. Then there's the deliberate system. That's your conscious awareness. It's slow, requires effort, it's flexible, it's what you use for complex problems, learning new things, making careful decisions.
So how do they work together? Is one in charge?
They collaborate. The automatic system does a lot of the grunt work, feeding interpretations and possibilities up to the deliberate system. It can also act like an alarm bell, flagging things that need conscious attention.
And the deliberate system.
Yeah.
It has a special power, right? Conscious override.
Yes. This is absolutely crucial for living in a culture. It's the ability of your conscious mind to intervene and stop or change an impulse coming from the automatic system.
Like when someone cuts you off in traffic and your automatic reaction is pure rage.
Right. And your deliberate system steps in and says, nope, don't lean on the horn, don't escalate this, or resisting the urge to eat that whole cake, or snap back at a critical comment.
So self-control isn't necessarily about starting good behaviors, but often about stopping bad ones that pop up automatically.
A lot of it seems to be that, yeah. Veto power. It's essential for following rules, laws, morals, all the stuff culture requires. Without conscious override, complex social life would be impossible.
That shifts how you think about self-control,
Yeah.
like an internal battle sometimes.
Definitely. And another key feature of navigating this social world is dealing with trade-offs.
Meaning you can't have it all.
Pretty much. Almost every choice involves giving something up to get something else. There's rarely a perfect option.
Like deciding whether to study tonight or go out with friends. Benefit now versus potential benefit later.
Exactly. The sources contrast this with animals. Even smart ones like chimps don't seem to plan for the future in the same way like storing food when they're not hungry just because they know they'll be hungry later. Humans are constantly making these time-based trade-offs. Delayed gratification is central to culture.
And it's not just personal choices, right? Societies face huge trade-offs.
Oh, constantly. Think about energy policy. Do you allow fracking for cheaper energy and jobs now, even with potential long-term environmental risks? Or protect the environment now, maybe with higher energy costs or for fewer jobs in that sector?
Taxes versus government services is another one.
Right. Politicians might try to obscure these trade-offs, especially near elections, but governing is fundamentally about managing them. There are always competing values and consequences.
And a third feature that keeps coming up is how much humans put people first.
Yeah, this is fundamental. Unlike most animals that get resources directly from nature, we get almost everything we need from other people.
Food from farmers, via supermarkets, shelter built by construction workers, information from teachers, or the internet.
It's all mediated through this vast social and cultural network. Specialization of labor means we rely on countless others. Culture itself is like this huge repository of shared knowledge passed down and learned from others. How to cook, how to use tools, how to behave in different situations.
We learn it all from the group.
So these three things, the duplex mind with its conscious override, the reality of trade-offs, and our deep reliance on the cultural network, they really define the landscape of our social lives.
It's worth paying attention to during the day, isn't it? Noticing those automatic urges you fight, the small choices where you give something up, and just how much you depend on others.
For sure. But, okay, how do we actually know all this? How do social psychologists go beyond just observing and anecdotes?
Right, the science part, the methods.
It starts with the basic scientific method, See a problem, form a hypothesis, a testable prediction, design a study, collect data, analyze it, see if the hypothesis holds up, and then tell others about it.
And a key step is taking abstract ideas like frustration or conformity and figuring out how to measure them concretely.
That's operational definitions, turning an abstract construct into something observable and measurable, like defining frustration as being blocked from reaching a goal and aggression as number of times someone insults another person in the next 5 minutes.
Got it. And if you want to know if one thing causes another, the gold standard is the experiment, right?
Yes. In a true experiment, the researcher controls the situation, manipulates the variable they think is the cause, the independent variable.
Like maybe showing one group a violent film and another group a neutral film.
Exactly. And then they measure the outcome they think has affected the dependent variable, like subsequent aggressive behavior.
And the absolute crucial part is random assignment.
Absolutely critical. Randomly putting participants into the different conditions, violent film or neutral film, means the group should be roughly equivalent to start with on average. So any difference you find later in aggression is likely caused by the film, not some pre-existing difference between the groups.
That's how you can infer causality.
Right. Statistical tests help determine if the difference is likely real or just a fluke, usually using that p.05 threshold, less than 5% chance it happened randomly.
Now, experiments can be done in labs, very controlled environments.
Which gives you high internal validity confidence the independent variable caused the change, but maybe it feels a bit artificial.
Or they can be done out in the real-world field experiments.
Field experiments happen in natural settings. They might have less control, but potentially more mundane realism. The setting is like everyday life.
But the sources say what's often more important is experimental realism.
Yeah, that's whether the participants get psychologically involved in the situation, whether it feels real to them, even if it's in a lab. If they forget they're in a study and just react naturally, that's high experimental realism. That helps with external validity, generalizing the findings.
Like that parking lot study you mentioned earlier. People were really just trying to leave a parking lot. Or other studies mentioned, like observing personal space invasion in public restrooms. People were definitely involved.
Those are great examples of field experiments aiming for high experimental realism.
Okay, but sometimes you just can't do an experiment. You can't randomly assign someone to be male or female, or rich or poor, or to experience a natural disaster.
Right. In those cases, you often rely on non-experimental or correlational research. You measure variables as they naturally exist and see if they are related.
You see if they go together.
Exactly. Does variable A tend to increase when variable B increases? That's a positive correlation. Or does A decrease when B increases? That's negative. Or are they unrelated? Zero correlation. We measure the strength and direction with that correlation coefficient, R.
But this is the big warning label. Correlation does not prove causation.
Cannot say it enough times. Just because two things are related doesn't mean one causes the other.
The classic example,
Yeah.
ice cream sales and drowning rates are positively correlated.
Right. But eating ice cream doesn't make you drown.
And sadly, drowning doesn't make you crave ice cream.
No. There's almost certainly a third variable involved: hot weather. Hot weather makes people buy more ice cream. A&D makes more people go swimming, which increases the chance of drowning.
So correlations are useful for seeing relationships, for making predictions maybe, but not for saying A causes B.
Precisely. You need experiments for causal claims.
Surveys are another tool, right? Asking lots of people questions.
Yep. Questionnaires to get attitudes, opinions, self-reported behaviors from a sample of people. If you use a random sample where everyone in the population you're interested in had an equal chance of being picked, you can generalize the results back to that population with a certain margin of error.
But surveys have pitfalls too, like how you word the questions.
Oh, definitely. Question wording, the order of questions, whether people trust the survey or want to look good, all that can bias the results.
And across all these methods, researchers care about two key things: reliability and validity.
Reliability is consistency. Does your measure give you roughly the same result time after time? Validity is accuracy. Is your measure actually capturing the concept it's supposed to measure?
The target analogy helps here. You could be reliably hitting the same spot on the target edge, reliable, but not valid if you're aiming for the bullseye.
Exactly. Ideally, you want to be both reliable and valid, consistently hitting the bullseye.
It's important to remember, science isn't foolproof. Sometimes hypotheses are wrong, studies have flaws, occasionally there's even fraud.
True. But the strength of the scientific process is that it's self-correcting over time. Replication is key. Other researchers try to repeat studies. If findings hold up across multiple labs and studies, confidence grows. If they don't, the field adjusts.
So why this whole dive into methods? Why should someone listening care about independent variables and correlations?
Because understanding how we know what we claim to know is crucial. It's what separates social psychology from just, common sense or armchair speculation. It lets you evaluate the evidence behind claims about human behavior.
It's the how behind the what. Makes sense.
Exactly.
Okay, wow. We've really covered some ground in this deep dive.
We have.
We started way back with the origins, seeing how social psychology emerged from trying to understand confusing real-world behavior and how it grew alongside history.
Then we dug into that core tension, nature versus culture, realizing it's not an either, but a constant interaction shaping who we are. Nature influences culture, culture shapes how we express biology.
And we looked at those key features of human social life that arise from this interplay. The duplex mind, that automatic pilot, and the deliberate controller with its crucial veto power, the conscious override.
And the constant reality of trade-offs. No easy answers, always balancing competing factors, especially over time. And our profound reliance on each other, on the cultural web of information and cooperation.
And then we wrapped up with a look at the toolkit, the scientific methods psychologists use to actually study all this, from experiments testing cause and effect to correlations looking for relationships, and why those methods matter for trusting the findings.
It really provides a framework, doesn't it? A way to look at the social world, and maybe even yourself, with slightly different eyes.
Yeah, start noticing those things in your own day. Like, when do you feel that automatic impulse and have to consciously stop it? What trade-offs are you making, big or small? How much are you just coasting on cultural knowledge learned from others?
It becomes a lens for observation.
And thinking again about that duplex mind, that powerful automatic system running so much of the show, and the effortful conscious override needed just to function within cultural rules and manage all those trade-offs. It does make you pause and think, doesn't it? If so much is automatic, and so much is shaped by nature and culture in ways we don't fully control, how much real conscious free will are we actually exercising as we navigate our social lives every day?
That is definitely something to mull over.
Something to think about.
Hmm.
We'll leave it there for this deep dive.
Yeah.